Hello, my name is Rich Luby, and today's conversation is revolving around the life as a software engineer in 2025. Our guest is Jorge Lara Garduno, who has been working within the technical field, for 13 plus years with organizations like Microsoft, and now he is a software engineer at Airbnb. Jorge, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Rich.
Yeah, before we go into a few questions, why don't you give an introduction to yourself?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I've been in the software industry for 13 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I've been working in a variety of different places. I started in a small startup in the Bay Area, then at Microsoft, and now, like you said, at Airbnb. And yeah, I mean, I've been involved with Code Platoon as a mentor in the past. I also did some volunteering in the MSSA program for Microsoft, for those who are familiar with it. And currently at Airbnb, I volunteer with the Connect program, which is an apprenticeship program that we offer.
Excellent. Before we go into some of the questions I had ready to go, can you give us a little bit more insight on some of the programs you were mentioning? What were they geared to, and specifically, what were you doing?
Yeah. So at MSSA, it was so that program is for veterans who are trying to transition into the private sector. That one is particularly targeted towards veterans, and my role in it was sort of just a general mentor, but also helping with things like practice interviews, stuff like that. And in the Connect program, that one is intended for anybody that doesn't have a traditional 4-year degree, like in computer science or engineering or something like that, that wants to join Airbnb as a software apprentice. And there's a variety of different things that I've done there, sort of help with at one point like the interview process to get into the program. This past year was more on the lecture side, so give a couple of like lectures on topics on the front end side. So yeah.
Appreciate that. And considering Copatoon is geared towards the military community, helping people transition with confidence into tech careers, and all the background information you just gave about giving back to that community, what's your connection there?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that. I don't really have a direct connection with the military. And one of the reasons why I was interested in helping out in the beginning was kind of precisely that. I was looking, I did TAing I did a teaching assistant job when I was in grad school. That's kind of how I paid for grad school. And I found that I really, really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And so soon after I started, working in industry, that was something that I wanted to get back to and not like lose that. And I was looking at different opportunities, and then one of them that came up was to help with the veteran community. And I figured, it's I think it's important sometimes to reach out beyond just like your bubble and connect with people that you might not know otherwise. And so that was kind of an opportunity to get out of my comfort zone and learn about something that was new to me. And I'm so glad that I did, because A, I learned a lot, and B, it's just been tremendously satisfying. Just like it's been a great experience.
Well, I'm also glad you did because now we're talking, right? And
Yeah.
and I really think that the topic around being a software engineer in 2025 is key and important to anybody in the industry, but specifically people who are considering going into tech in
Mhm.
this time period and what to expect. So the first question I had for you is, all right, let's say somebody already has a 4-year degree, or they successfully completed Code Platoon or another tech coding boot camp. What's next in terms of technical aptitude? What should they be doing?
Yeah, um I think of this as like in two different angles, right? So there is if you're kind of like trying to look for that first job versus if you already have that first job and you're very early in your career. For the first job, uh, it's it is a bit of a challenge, right? Like the industry is going through a lot of different changes. There was a dramatic change, around 2022 when the dynamics of the job market changed. And now with AI, things are changing and we're sort of like in the middle of it. But how do you even like adapt to something like that? So, for that early, kind of getting that first job, it's it is a bit of a challenge as far as staying, just your technical like aptitude. There's a couple of things, right? So one is, I know that people talk about this a lot, like working on your own personal projects. That you know the thing about the reality is, like, whether you go through a coding boot camp or a 4-year degree, the experience of like when you very start for the very first time is similar. Like, believe it or not, if you're, you might feel like, oh, I just went through a coding boot camp, somebody with a 4-year degree is going to hit the ground running, and the reality is that that's not really true. um you learn a lot of like theory and stuff like that in an undergrad, but there's still quite a bit of a ramp up as far as like how to be a productive member of the team. And so, like getting that more real world experience is valuable. And so, as far as, working on your own personal projects, I would say focus on things that are solving, I'm going to put it in quotes, real world problems. By that I mean, think of things that you in your everyday life either like to do or hobbies. It doesn't have to be you're solving, I don't know, just like data entry or something like that, something that is like a business need necessarily. But I think that if you tackle something that is important to you, you're going to be more motivated. Two, there's a better chance that you'll use it or other people are going to use it. And then you'll get a much better, you'll get a lot more out of the experience rather than doing something kind of like a toy project that is more sort of theoretical. I would definitely go beyond just sort of like creating a website. Like, create something that, just as an example, right? So it's probably not very surprising, but I am a total nerd, and I recently started playing Dungeons and Dragons with my group of friends. And so,
Wait, wait, wait,
one of
wait. I'm sorry. You calling yourself a nerd and you're just starting to play? Isn't
I know.
isn't
Yeah,
that a prereq?
it is a prereq, and I actually kept that like secret from most people for a long time because I was afraid of losing my card. But yeah, it was something that was definitely a gap that I've now addressed. But like one of the things that we do is, as you that I've learned, is like there's all this like tracking of information of these like characters and who we've met and like places that we've been and what are we doing right now. And I thought it'd be fun to do a tool that I'm working on, sort of on my own time, just to sort of like a web app that helps keep track of all of that stuff, right? And I don't even know if I'm going to share it with like my friends at this point, but if at some point maybe they start using it too, they could get me like some feedback on that.
Hmm.
And so it doesn't have to be, like I said, something that is very like in a traditional way, like serious. But like if you really think about what goes into something like that, it's like there's some like authentication. Where do I host this? I'm like working on something, like what framework do I use? How am I creating these like views on the web app, and all that kind of stuff can transition into something that is more useful, but at the same time, it's something that is personal to me and that I have an interest in, um, versus something more, like I said, theoretical. Yeah.
You maybe spark another question because when I work with students, I'm the head of career services for Code Platoon, and especially in this market, there are a lot of times where jobs aren't readily available, right? So they have to stay fresh on their skill sets, and also they need to do resume builders. So I've encouraged a lot of people to look at volunteer opportunities to put on their resume,
Yeah.
and just like working on their personal projects, I also agree. My question to you is this: is it better to stay focused on one project and continuously build that out by phases and showing the growth, or should they jump around and do different projects?
Yeah, I think what I would want to have in I think both things are valuable, right? I think having a project that is not just surface level, that you can at least sort of talk about, whether it's in an interview or like that, because you went deep enough that it really kind of pushed you're learning more things. And so, I would say if you have a project where you kind of went the depth route, and you have one of those under your belt, I think, approaching, actually, the volunteering opportunities is a great a thing to do there too, because you're working with people, it is solving a problem, you're kind of giving back to the community, right? Um, so that is an excellent idea. I would just say, make sure that whatever it is that you do, even if you have like a couple, like have one where you kind of go deeper into like the tech side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, so having a portfolio of different types of things, right? It's like, oh, this one I went deeper in, this one was a smaller scale thing that focuses in solely on this area or this technology. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like even working with multiple things, that'll enrich your background in a different way, right? So, part of the thing that is involves being in the industry is like the ability to work with different people, and
Mhm.
so getting that exposure of like, okay, I work with gather requirements from different people, different working styles, different communication styles, and being able to do that is useful. And so that's sort of complementary skills, right? Sort of like being able to work with a lot of different projects, but also that depth as well.
That's really interesting. You kind of said something in your response early on about, the change in the landscape in AI, and you almost kind of made a joke about how do we deal with that, right? And it kind of goes right into the next question I had about, all right, because AI is changing the landscape, how do you specifically stay on top of that? And what are you doing to make sure that you're staying fresh in that changing environment?
Yeah, this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about because it is like the rate of change is just absolutely nuts. You could entirely dedicate, have like that be your full time, just like AI, and keeping up with it is in itself difficult. Um, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. So one is I think it's good to keep track of things, but I think there's also you can kind of go too far. I think there's this sense also of this kind of a little bit of anxiety of like, oh my God, am I keeping up with everything that's going on? And I don't think that's like completely necessary. And also because things are changing so quickly, it is very possible that like something that you learned, in 6 months, like the thinking around it has changed. And
Obsolete
so,
type of thing.
it may not be because it's not changing in a linear way, that
Mhm.
some things that we thought were true have changed, assumptions about like what's going to happen. And so, I think what I would say, it's almost kind of like when people talk about like investing, right? Where, looking at the stock market every day is really not that helpful because, it's just like when you zoom in, it's changing so quickly that like you're just going to give yourself an ulcer, right? If you're like looking at it and like, oh wow, I'm down like 3% today, and like tomorrow I'm up 5%, but then like I'm down. It's just like
You
too, yeah.
Yeah, my perspective and my analogy would have been me getting on the weight scale and seeing it change and
Yeah,
being like, oh my gosh, why? I just walked like 2 seconds, you know?
that's another like great analogy, right? Because it's like there are so many like little changes that like it's just too zoomed in, right? It's not that helpful for most people. And so what I would say is like really what you can kind of do is like maybe even if like every 3 months you want to like kind of like check out, like come up for air and see how things are looking in the environment. um so it's kind of something in the middle, right? You don't want to ignore it. Everything that's happening with AI, you know, and there are folks who say, we're in a bubble. This is all just kind of. It's like okay, maybe, but it's hard for me to think that this is not going to have some lasting impact on the industry one way or another. And so you definitely want to be in the loop, but you also don't want to go so far as to like feel this like I said, sort of anxiety of, hey, I need to keep up with everything that's happening. And every other week it feels like some big news is coming out, but I don't think that it's like necessary to that degree. That said, more specific things. One plays. There's a guy, Simon Willison. So he's actually the co-creator of the Django framework that I know that Code Platoon
Oh,
uses.
yeah.
So um, he has a blog, and it's kind of surfaced as one of like it's like a really great resource for people, especially coming in from like the angle of like he's a developer, um, he's somebody who's excited about AI, but it's not just sort of like hyping it up for like no reason. It's not like, some of the AI hustlers that you see on YouTube that are kind of like more, the signal to noise ratio with some of that stuff is not very high because it's a lot about, hey, what can I do to sound, like get your attention, attention
Yep.
grabbing headlines, clickbait, that kind of
Click,
stuff.
yeah, I was gonna say clickbait. Yeah.
Exactly. And I find that Simon is pretty high signal to noise ratio. And I think his website is like simonwillison.net.
I was just gonna
And
ask if you had it. Can you just read it out? We'll also add it to the information after the recording.
yeah, he's great. I think that if you use that as like one of your principal, resources for finding out what's going on. I think he even started this like new mailing list where he sort of condenses it into, but that might be paid actually now that I think about it. So anyway, that's like a resource that I think is very useful. And then the other thing I would say is like just use the stuff, and there are a lot of different tools out there. Pick one of the ones that you see mentioned commonly. For example, there's been a lot of talk about cloud code, and just again sort of tied into this like project that you're working on in your
Yeah.
time or whatever. um Use it. A lot of that is just getting familiar with how it works, and kind of getting that firsthand experience of how these tools work, what works well, what doesn't work well. And I think that would you know keep you up to date with what's going on in a pretty good way.
Are there any specific AI tools that you use on a daily basis?
So there's a couple. So on for my personal stuff that I work on my personal time, like I said, I've been using Cloud Code a lot, and I really like it. Before that, it was Cursor. Again, not that you have to like jump from like trend to trend. I think it's fine to just pick one, uh, one of the ones that are better known, and kind of play around with it. I've been using Cloud Code, and it's been great. On at work, we the infrastructure team has created like tooling to sort of like create a layer of abstraction from like specific vendors, and so we have basically internal tooling that then talks to different ones so that we're not kind of like tied into one particular provider. um, so that's more just kind of like Airbnb specific tooling that I use for work.
Got it. You said something about kind of going back to the project base and then leveraging AI tools. Learn the baseline understanding of it so that you could talk confidently about it. And maybe that's something that's industry specific to maybe if you're a job seeking in certain industries and certain type of companies. I couldn't agree more. One thing that I hear from job seekers when they get asked the question like, "Do you have experience doing X?" They are quick to say, well, I don't have much experience or I just started. And sometimes it's like, even if you've just been doing a personal project for a few months, you have experience. It's
Mhm.
not just experience. I want you to lead with what you have versus what you kind of have and maybe don't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think the way that I think about it, because I've also been on the other side of like as a hiring for a while. I was a hiring manager at Microsoft, and I've also in other just when you're in the industry for a while, you just do a lot of like interviews, right? Um, I think if you just present, just as long as you're being honest about like, hey, this is what I have, it is not really your job to be the one filtering yourself out, right? Like it is,
Thank you.
as the interviewer, if hopefully, I have enough experience and they've picked like the right people to do it, if the right person is interviewing you, they're the ones who are going to be able to sort of like keep asking, go deep or something to find out if you do or have the bar that they need for the job that they're hiring for. Um, but yeah, other than that, like I think I totally agree. You don't have to qualify statements, right? In terms of like, well, it's not just. be transparent. This is what I have, and then let the interviewer do the digging.
I'm gonna star this portion of the recording because I want to play this back to all the students that I work with. And I'm so glad that you said that. And this was not prompt in the pre-recording, by the way. This is very organic. Um, One question that I usually ask everybody, because everybody's got an opinion and I love opinions, is
Yeah.
so AI, is that gonna say goodbye to entry-level tech talent and software engineers?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is like I don't know, and nobody really knows.
That's accurate. Yes.
Yeah, and it's I think it's useful to try to see what's coming down the pipeline, but especially with AI, and I get it. I mean, it's such a new, potentially, like, just the scope of how much it can change things is so big that I think it's comforting for us to want to know what's like ahead, right? Like what and but the problem is though that I think you can kind of over index on predictions, and back to this thing about like things are changing so quickly that if you don't make the right pick, it can be kind of costly, right? So as an example, not that long ago, there was all this talk about like prompt engineering, and this was like this new career. People started calling themselves, like, labeling themselves as like a prompt engineer, on LinkedIn, like 2 months before, like, or 2 months after this was like coined as a term. And like nowadays, that's really not kind of a thing. There's not as much emphasis. Like the tooling got better about understanding what, like, people were trying to ask it, right? And so the tools themselves got better through training. There's like more now emphasis on, customizing, or like doing additional training and specialization of like tools, and less emphasis on like I as a person that is using ChatGPT or whatever. I'm sort of filling in this gap of to get what I want out of the tool. So but if you or the companies that were there was also a lot of talk about like vector, like searching, and there were companies created completely around it. And it's not like vector search is completely like irrelevant, but it was not nearly as big of a deal as we initially thought it might be. And so if you're somebody who like looks at those predictions and goes fully in on them, maybe that's not right, like the right thing to do. And so I think there's value in also like keeping track of what's happening, but also living in the present and just sort of observing, versus jumping so much into like predictions, right? But that said, I mean, it is useful to sort of see, okay, where are things kind of like going. As far as that, it's I I don't see as much. I do see like this kind of like general trend in the industry where hiring for early career positions has paused or like
Yeah. Bye bye.
reduced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Drastically, actually, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't quite understand the game plan long term, because at some point we're gonna have to like replace the people that start retiring and with like a new batch of people,
So
right?
yeah, the workforce portion of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, like, there's going to be this gap, like something, and for all the talk about replacing people, like we kind of have to be more nuanced about like what do we mean exactly when we say we're replacing people, right? Because like the idea that you're going to fully automate somebody's job is, and I'm not just saying this because it's like my livelihood and stuff, but I hope I'm being somewhat objective here, is that like if you look at what my day to day is, coding is only a portion of it, right? There's so much about like communicating with people, trying to figure out like what, dealing with ambiguity, trying to like get multiple teams to kind of like come together to come up with a plan. How do we like execute on this plan? And like AI can help with some of that, but it's not fully ready to sort of like completely automate something, right? Um, I think where you can see some like job losses, like if theoretically I am 20% more like productive using AI tools, and even then there's been some like studies like that came out recently where it's like actually that might not be as, as real as we think. There might be some more nuance there, but you know let's say that I increase my productivity 20%. Now with like 5 engineers, you could replace, now you don't need that sixth one potentially, so now there's like less of a need for jobs. um but as far as like fully replacing somebody, we're really not there yet. And there's this long tail of, you know, where you talk about like the 80-20%, 80-20 rule, right? Where like the last 20% takes up like 80% of your effort, right? Of a particular. So I think that this goal of like automating something is going to be really, really difficult to completely automate something fully, right? I think there's always going to be a need for a person who has the skills to and like understands how things like work, doesn't have just surface level understanding to be able to leverage these tools. And so, as far as like bringing it back to like entry level positions, is it going to completely get rid of them? I have a hard time understanding, like, just even on a theoretical basis, like, okay, at some point you're going to need to replace these people with, like, there's going to have to be a new generation of
Yeah.
engineers.
And with the new generation of engineers, maybe it's not what we see as an engineer right now. You're still going to need people to make sure that the data coming out of AI is accurate, the information is funneled correctly, things, at least as of right now, I think like the next phase. So, like you said, you might lose one or two roles, but people are going to have to morph or change into new positions to proofread, for lack of a better word, the
Mhm.
information going into AI. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of the job will definitely change. I mean, I can already see it changing. You know, for me at least a little bit. I mean, I see the effects, but you'll still want, at least for now, it doesn't seem like we're anywhere close to, you know. But again, it's like that's what's hard with predictions with AI. Something could change in 6 months or
Yeah.
whatever. But it seems like there's going to be the need for that person to help drive, and the trend now is more towards, the really powerful combination seems to be humans plus AI. You know, AI augmented humans that can do more. And in that world, learning how to harness the power of computers by being you're somebody who knows how to program computers and understands how they work. AI, if anything, is going to make you more that skill set more valuable, right?
Point.
So, like, potentially, like, even not just your, in terms of like employment, but like doing your own thing, right? You could create your own software company. um Now the things that you're able to do with as a single person get, you know if we think potentially like multiplied, right? So maybe we'll see an increase in like number of like small person startups, right? Because if now with me and 3 other friends we could start a company that used to take like 10 people,
Hmm.
that might be something that we start seeing more of, right?
Yeah, or get from stage A to B much quicker with AI.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So, it's there is something to be said about, you know, thinking about, hey, this the power that AI brings, it's something that is going to augment my skills and the economic value that I can generate from knowing how to use these tools.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna sound like a really grumpy old man, but those self-checkout lines in the grocery store, I can't
Yeah.
stand them.
Yeah.
They end up, the red light comes on, some human's got to come over and tell me that I did something wrong or didn't read right. Bring back the people at the cashier. That's my
Yeah.
that's my rant for the day.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you, but it's like that's such a much simpler. But even then, right? You've seen stores that really went deep into that, like, hey, let's try to like get rid of like cashiers completely, and it's just like it doesn't. You still need that person, right?
Yeah.
Like,
You have 15 lines, right? Only one human being cashier and then 14 automated, right? And it's
mhm,
just the line is out the door. And
right?
all I wanted to do was buy Tic Tacs before my dinner date. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Hey, before we close out this conversation, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you or learn more about you, how could we do that?
Oh, okay. See, okay, this is gonna be my grumpy old man like moment because like
Oh,
I
please.
haven't really like connect like gotten involved very deep with like social media. Like I consume it as a reader mostly.
Ooh,
But
okay.
if
By the way,
somebody wants,
by the way, I'm going to cut you off. You could also say, I'm not giving it out.
you know, if somebody wants to reach out, how about this? Like they can, we'll find a way to connect.
All right. So, by the way, so listeners, you have to reach out to Rich Luby, which you could find me if you just Google me, and then reach out, ask to be connected, and I'll make the introduction. How about that?
Yeah, that's perfect. And I know that sounds standoffish. I am much more friendly. I just like I don't have, like the social media, like Twitter or whatever that people can reach out to. But if you want to talk, I would be more than happy to do that.
Hey, the pleasure is all mine for this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for going through these three questions. I look forward to working with you in the future. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you.